welcome to another segment of simple cutting techniques. Today we'll be treating tops. We'll be teaching us how to cut simple tops which form the basis for every other kind of top that you may want to cut. Let's go straight to the board. Now, to cut your simple top, there are basic measurements to consider. First, the neck. What kind of neck? Then the width of the neck, and then the depth of the neck. Very important. Then your shoulder is equally important, your bust, your waist, and then your hip. Then you come to the sleeve, then the arm width and length. We are going to quickly do this in about 5 minutes. Now the first thing you do is your fabric. As always, we are doing 4-fold, which is always easier since we are doing the easier way to cut our fabrics. First, fold it into 2. Make sure you have considered. Now I'm using this as a case study. A shoulder 14, a bust 28, a waist 24, and a hip 30. Make sure that the amount of fabric you have can cover much more than the measurement on ground. That is very important. So you fold into 2. Bring the other part, overlay it, leaving 1.5, like you do when you cut your pencil skirt, for the zip and seam allowance at the back. Fold it in very nicely. Remember, as always, you should have your edge cut out straight. If it's not straight after laying, it's allowed to trim off. Make sure you have a straight edge here. So 1.5 here for my zip allowance and the seam allowance. Like I said, always chalk it out so that you won't miss the fold. Chalk it out. Then we start with the neck. Now, I said depending on the kind of neck you want, there are different kinds of neck for a top, but we are making a simple round neck. A simple round neck, and I'm going to use a width 7 at the back, and then the depth is going to be just 5. A width 7 and a depth 5. Now, for the neck, it will be folded into 2. For the width of the neck, you are folding it into 2. Now, this is it. I said I'm going to have a width 7, so divided by 2 gives me a 3.5. So here is my 3.5. Then the depth, I said I want to have a 5. That one you don't divide, you leave it exactly as it is, 5. Now there is also one thing to consider, whether you want the front and the back in the same shape, as you want the front and the back of the neck looking the same, or you want to have a higher neck at the back. You want depth at the front or higher neck at the back. That's where I'm going to do this one. Your simple regular top will have a higher neck at the back, and then you have the depth here. So it's only the front I will be chopping off on 5. So I have the depth as 5, and I have my width as 3.5, which eventually gives me 7. Then you just connect. To have a perfect connection, do this. It's very important. Take your 5 again here. Give it like a rectangle shape. Then you take it this way and give your curve. That will help you to know how to curve easily. Take your 3.5, take your 5, take your 5 again from that 3.5 point, and then just give it, the depth is just like 3/4, not up to 1 inch, and then from that depth just give it your curve. You have your good curve shape for your round neck. And then the next thing, you go to the shoulder. I have a shoulder 14 divided into 2, which will give me a 7. Then I have my bust. Now remember, in the previous video I talked about the bust line. That's where your tape will always be when you are measuring anything bust. How do I get my bust line? Now this is my shoulder area. I'm going to take it 1 inch slanting. 1 instant. Please study this properly. This is my neck, the width of the neck, the depth of the neck, and then the shoulder, dropping by 1 inch. From the drop of that shoulder, take your bust line, which is 8. Note where I'm taking my bust line from the end of that shoulder, that one drop, I take my 8, which is my bust line. And then from that bust line, I take my bust measurement, which is 28 divided by 4. It gives me 7. I take my 7 plus 1 inch seam allowance. That gives me an 8. Then the next, I'll curve. This is my bust line. From this bust line, I'll chop out my armhole to connect it to the shoulder. I just take from that along, bring it down, and then curve. Immediately you get to that, it gives me my armhole. The actual bust sewing allowance, from this sewing allowance and actual bust, connect it together and just immediately give your turn, very sharp turn, and then finish it up at the tip of that shoulder. That gives you your armhole. Then my bust waistline now. This is only because of the bust line and your armhole that you take your bust line measurement from the drop of the shoulder. Every other measurement comes from here. This place is the top part of your neck. Take from here. 16 is my half length or waistline. 16, and then just all together, depending on whatever I want the length of the top to be. Let's assume I want a length 25 for my top, and then finishing allowance, I'm giving it 1.5. So I have a length 25, 1.5, but my hip line is 24. Remember, I mentioned that in the previous video. Waistline 16, hip line 24, actual length, and then your allowance. Then take it this way. Here I'm going to measure my waist, which is 28. 28 divided by 24. 24 divided by 4 is going to give me a 6 plus 2. The reason why we're adding 2, not 1, is because we're going to chop out our dart. 1 inch for dart and 1 inch for seam allowance. So it's going to be the actual waist measurement divided by 4 plus 2. Then you connect it this way. Connect it to your armhole. Then the hip here, because your blouse is going to be resting on your hip area, just like what I'm wearing. Although this one is a peplum top, we're going to get there in time, but if it will be a normal straight top, my hip is a little bigger than my waist, so my blouse should go something like this. It should, if it doesn't go like that, it will not fit on this area. So I'm going to use my hip allowance, my hip line. On my hip line, I take my hip. The hip for this top is 30. Divide it by 4, and that will give me 7.5 plus seam allowance. I'm going to give it, instead of 1 now, I'm giving 1.5, so that it will push it out a little. It should push it out a little. And then this is my hip, my waist, and my bust line and armhole. I'll take my ruler. Now this is where I'm finishing it from. This is my actual length, 25. This is the finishing allowance for the whole top. I gave it 1.5. This is my hip line, my waistline. So I'm going to connect this. This is the shape you should have at the end of the day for your top. So it goes like this. This is the shape you should have for your top. This goes also for a dress. If I were to be making a dress, the only thing I need to do is just lengthen, give it the actual length, which is going to be longer than the top. But this measurement or this technique also goes for making a gown. a dress. So this is study it properly. You have your neck, you have your shoulder, you have your armhole. Then this is the shape you should have for your top. You have your waistline, you have your hip, you have the actual length, you have the finishing, and here's where you have. By the time you want to give it a cut, I told you that we are having only the front depth in. Give it a quick cut. Now for the back, I'm going to give it just 1 inch in. 1 inch. Because it's going to be high neck at the back. 1 inch. Put it together. Chop it out. And then you have your blouse. This is the front, top part of my blouse. Frontal part of my blouse. And this is, by the time I sew this one together, to be the back, the armhole, the zip allowance.